Dissonant. Okay, so what a great provocative name for the session. It's written all over your face. That's a pretty common expression. What we're going to look at today is how we can use that truth to attempt to gain insight, to use that as a diagnostic tool for research. And I have a couple of little pre-mumble slides on why we should care about that to begin with. Recent research, and I would suggest some of the best research we've seen in the field of advertising effectiveness, has suggested that engagement is the strongest correlate for advertising effectiveness. Now you might bristle at that and say, well, gosh, that's a pretty bold statement. But if you think about it and the way that consumers digest content, engagement's really the bottleneck. So, if you look at your own family, you look at people, with the TV on in the room, there's an awful lot going on, including a lot of mobile phone usage. Recent research shows 27% of ads air in an empty room. 69% of all ads receive absolutely no visual attention while they're playing. And that has nothing to do with skip buttons. That's just people not paying attention, not looking at the TV. So because it's the bottleneck, it's also kind of the gatekeeper for advertising effectiveness, which explains why it's such a strong correlate. So we know engagement is important, irrespective of how much weight you give it. We know that it's growing in importance. And there's also mounting evidence that facial coding is a stronger predictor of engagement, at least than conscious evaluation or self-reported evaluation. Yes, this ad was engaging. Yes, I really appreciated this ad, etc. Those have shown to be about 14% correlated to engagement. And in this particular test we're showing here, this is using iSpot TV's definition of engagement, which uses online views and social sharing as a proxy for an ad that is socially engaging. Whereas facial coding, the correlation is stronger at a 47.2. So we know that engagement's important. We know that facial coding is a legitimate, if not one of the stronger predictors of engagement. So today, with that set up in terms of the importance of what we're talking about, we're going to talk about interpreting emotional response to an ad and maybe show you a live example. We do an awful lot of this, not just as a company, but personally, Sarah and I do an awful lot of interpreting emotional responses, hundreds of ads every year we personally go through in great detail. So we want to share some of that with you in terms of how we approach it. We'll give you some tips, some little trade secrets for diagnosing emotional expressions, and then hopefully have a couple of minutes at the end for Q&A.
Stephen, if I could just add, what we're really doing here at Sentient is, and it's fun, it's something we get to do in our role, is we're analyzing stories. And I've learned so much from you, Stephen, that we're analyzing stories that brands are trying to tell. They're trying to make us feel better about their products. We know these as advertisements, but when we use facial expression coding, it's amazing how you have the insight just so accessible and available to you to really understand whether or not the story, the brand, is following the protocol, the establishment of dissonance, whether it's humorous or not, influence, understanding the influence of each character's role in that story, and then understanding whether or not the conflict resolution is really having the impact that you need. So I just wanted to reinforce that the mindset is that we're looking at these advertisements as though they're stories and looking at those components of the stories with this facial expression coding.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Sarah, and a great segue, I think, to this next slide. I'm going to go ahead and turn down the sound for this because I don't think it's important for us to listen to it. We'll play it, and you can see sort of the facial coding line occurring there as we go. Sort of positives are up and negatives are down. But as you look at that, and by the way, I have no idea why this URL link is on my screen, so please ignore. But what Sarah was saying is that this really connects us to the story of the ad. I've never seen an ad test method that better connects us with what the agency and the brand team are trying to do. And that really reinforces this first point, that when you are going to analyze an ad, and we'll look at how to do that, there's more than just the simple line chart that you just viewed there. But number one, the most important thing is to become familiar with the ad, because you're trying to interpret why people are responding in certain ways to story. And without an understanding of what the story is supposed to do and what sort of response the story is intended to elicit, then it's very difficult to analyze. So we'll give you some step-by-step here, and then I'm going to go into a web view and show you what it looks like when we see an ad and we have the facial expression. But and that's what we'll do as number two. Watch the responses in real time. So watch how consumers are reacting as the ad plays. And in this particular ad, and I don't think we really need too much of the audio here, but what this ad is for, it's using chunky milk as a comic irony for things that you don't want to do. And you can see the chunks pouring out of the milk there, and you can see all that negative affect. But if you know the story and the intent of this comic irony, you say, well, that's intended. People are supposed to get grossed out, and grossed out is not a positive emotion. Apologies, it's not a technical emotion either, but you get what we're trying to say using some telegraphic language there. So this ad is supposed to generate some disgust, and then it's also supposed to generate some humor and some enjoyment. So watching those responses in real time to see, are people really enjoying where they're supposed to? Are they really grossing out where they're supposed to? And those are the questions that this will generate. I can tell you that the best analyses that I've done, I've probably watched the ad 20, 30, 40 times. And the questions that we ask are the positive and negative responses intended. Why are the peaks and troughs not more pronounced? Because we're trying to really amplify emotional engagement. What is surprising to you about when you watch people's responses? And then you can analyze, explain, and recommend changes to the consumer or to the client. So we're going to look at a web. I just clicked on a link here for an Uber video. I'm going to play this. Now we have a lot of line charts in here, so I'm going to go ahead and deselect some, but I'm going to familiarize you with what we're looking at, and then we're going to watch this ad. So here we go. So this is the entire audience that watched this ad. We're going to see it play, and what the axis on the left is basically the percent of people expressing on average positive or negative emotion. So that's just really percent of people. There's no I don't believe there's any ability yet to legitimately talk about the intensity of a single person's emotion. We're really just looking at positive versus negative as detected by even minor changes of facial muscles on the face. So this is percent of people expressing on average positive or negative emotion. Anything below 0 is negative. Anything above 0 is positive. Now I'm going to play this ad, and Sarah, can you just confirm for me whether you can hear the audio?
I can hear it.
Okay, great. So I'm going to start it again. So watch the ad and watch the positive, negative arcs.
It's slow, Stephen. Yeah, the sound's not coming through too well.
Okay, that's all right. It's just music, yeah. Okay, well, that's really interesting, huh? So this is great. So it starts out talking about wearing masks, and we see a bit of a negative dip there. And then, and we can scroll through this, and after it talks about wearing a mask, then it starts showing faces. Now, people love faces, and in particular, eyes. We've seen a lot of this in our studies, and it's a pretty clever little bit that it has here. Jasmine protects Pat, who then in turn protects Nancy. It shows some human connection. So we're seeing some positive reaction there, and we're making some conjecture as to why. But we do know there's not much going on. We see names, we see eyes, we see faces, we see mask differences, and then we see it sort of dips down near what we call the boredom line. So this is the 0 line. Now this could be something where maybe it doesn't need to be a 30-second ad. We kind of get the point. And the music doesn't really arc or climax. It doesn't really grow. It's just sort of good high energy music. So this tends to wear on. Now, as soon as it gets to this point and it says, we protect each other, and it starts talking about masks again, rather than showing fun faces and people smiling with their eyes, it gets continued negative. Okay, so now you're preaching to me about protecting each other, no mask, trying to control what I do. No mask, no ride. Oh, that's interesting. What is that exactly? Well, oh, it's Uber. Well, oh, that's cool. Okay, Uber's doing something good. I actually like that. So that's our initial sort of a thinking, and that's all hypothesis. And what you can do then is you can come down and you can say, well, let's look and see where there might be differences in how people digest this ad. So there are questions that are asked of people. Now we use response latency, or what we call quick conscious responses, so that we get really good sensitivity. But we ask questions like, is Uber authentic? And the people that think that Uber is more authentic after watching the ad than before, we can see their emotional differences. People that think that Uber is more or less controlling after seeing the ad, we can watch their differences. We can look at something more general, like people that have more emotional appeal for Uber after watching the ad versus before. We can look at those differences. So we can click on those buttons, take off the general, and what we see is that people that feel like Uber is less appealing after watching the ad are the same ones that generated the negative response to both this piece, which is the when you wear a mask piece, and the protecting each other. And so in terms of the message about wearing a mask, you had more negatives there, even though they felt like it was a good thing Uber was doing that. There's an easy way you can interpret this ad to be telling me to wear a mask. So is there a way that Uber could potentially lighten that aspect of it? Now, this is just an example. We're not going to go through in a lot of detail, but you can see, you can click on things like Uber's more or less controlling. You can click on things that are very important if you have a client that is interested in social sensitivity, sexist, racist, etc. And depending on the questions that are loaded up before the ad tests, you can cut the data that way and see where there's divergence. So yes, go ahead, Sarah.
Well, I was just going to add, so I guess in addition to the moment by moment optimization on the visual, you've got this supplement on the affect, and certainly it makes sense to pair some of those data cuts with some of what you're, obviously with what your communication strategy is striving to communicate. So
that's right.
It really boosts the opportunity to optimize on the narrative, and more specifically, bolster the appropriate or mitigate the emotion that the narrative may be activating.
Exactly, and this is a perfect example of what I think is one of the strongest values of facial coding in advertising, is that there are so many things that can be suggested to make the ad either more effective or less ineffective, for those people that might be, where there might be a false note, where there might be some tone deafness in the ad, where there might be one piece that's keeping someone from liking the ad. The facial coding analysis in real time allows you, and I'm going to go back to this to make this point because it's a really strong point here, is I'll just put it on all people for a second. This piece here in the beginning, there's a super that says when you wear a mask, and then where it gets negative at the end talks about protecting each other and talks about no mask, no ride. So the question that we have here is, could those supers be changed a bit so that it, let's assume that we've done our analysis and we find that our hypothesis is correct, and there are people that are interpreting this as sort of someone trying to tell me what to do wearing a mask, which we know is a great thing to do. So I'm not suggesting it's not, but we do know that there are people that don't want to be told what to do. So we think, well, maybe there's a way we can change those supers to be more universally appealing and more aspirational, like the images that we saw in the ad. So one of the things I love about this is that we can experiment with different supers. And that's something that can be done in editing. That's not something that the client has to shoot more footage. That's something you can do in post. So imagine taking the post-production, putting in some different supers, throwing them back in rapid subtext, and the next day, I think it is the next day, probably you have the answer. And you see, wow, we just improved the emotional engagement in that ad just by changing the super. in 24 to 48 hours, we've made that ad more effective. So that's a good example of something you do with facial coding that you certainly can't do with questions that only deal with how somebody feels after watching the ad. I'll give you a couple of real world examples. I won't share the client, but this was a tequila brand. And what we did here is we looked at negative emotion, and the red line is negative emotion, meaning the higher, the more negative, for people that didn't think that the tequila ad was believable. And the green line is people that did think the ad was believable. So the people that thought the ad was believable, they had sort of a general negative emotion that would just stay kind of static at a non-concerning sort of level based on our experience. And then when you see these peaks among the group that said, well, this really isn't believable, it's whenever there was a superlative statement made. The world's most awarded tequila, best in its class. When you choose this brand, you choose taste above all, and it's the best taste in tequila. These things all cause negative spikes. Then we looked deeper into this and found out that these were Mexican Americans. And the client was not surprised because this tequila is not Patron, and it's trying to influence the consumer. And you have a group of consumers who the client tells us is more sensitive and considers themselves to be aficionados of tequila. So we had a lot of discussion about whether telling somebody something is the best way to influence them rather than having them come to their own conclusions. But this is just a good example of being able to detect which group had what experience and why. And the client chose to leave this because they knew that this would be the case with this group, and it was not part of their strategy to influence this group so directly, so quickly, so they kept the ad. But it was a really good example of how cutting this data by believable, not believable can impact and allow you to diagnose. And I'll show you one other. There's an ad here that I'll play from the middle. What we have here is negative disgust. So this is in particular disgust that's being expressed while this girl sort of dances and talks about a Diet Coke product. Now, the lower, the more negative, the more disgusted. And males are the dashed line, and females are the dotted line. So males are initially more disgusted, and they look and they're like, they have some disgust. I don't know why. Maybe they're making some sort of evaluations of whatever. But we start playing it, and we see the girl dancing, and she's talking about Diet Coke. And then about 3/4 of the way through, she says, getting sexier now. Okay, and it's right about here where you'll see this coming. Getting sexier, she starts undulating her hips, and females go extremely negative. You have these two really deep cuts there. So we've got females who are watching this ad and are doing pretty well and may have even enjoyed. There was significant attention being paid to this ad, but man, did they have a negative reaction, and it was discussed in particular toward the end of this ad when she says getting sexier and starts undulating her hips. So there's a lot of footage in the can, Coca-Cola. Can we edit this and find some different footage so that we don't alienate female consumers? So I'm going to transition here in the last few minutes to 3 things that we found to be really important for successful advertising as revealed by facial coding. So these are common things to look for. And frankly, even if you don't have facial coding, it's something you should probably look for when analyzing an advertisement, either before testing or after testing. But the facial coding will reveal these things to be true. Is number one, it's super important to find the dissonance in an ad. So I'm going to play this ad as we talk. This was an ad for Heineken that aired a couple of years ago during the holidays. And it's introducing different characters, dad, mom, sister, and then we have this guy. Oh, okay. And then we have the stepdaughter, and then we have some different, little crazier cast of characters here, the twins. Okay, we have this little comedy. Tradition doesn't always have to be traditional, and then cut to the end card. So it's important to show you that when we show you the analysis. So dissonance is the thing that creates emotion. Our limbic system is engaged when we find dissonance. Our mind is hardwired to try to resolve that dissonance, to assign meaning to that dissonance, and it takes things into long-term memory. So dissonance is always important when we're trying to generate emotion and engagement. Dissonance. Go ahead, Sarah.
Can I reinforce? It can be
Please.
positive, it can be funny, it can be humorous, or it can be sad or more negative, but it really is what propels the story. So it's paramount.
Right. Yeah, dissonance can be surprise, intrigue, comic irony. Juxtaposition is just when two things that aren't expected occur either in succession or at the same time. So what we have here is dissonance that occurs, you can tell. Now, there could be dissonance occurring all throughout the ad, but the strong ones are mom's new boyfriend. You can see that negative dip there at about 10 or 11 seconds. And then we see some comic dissonance occurring at 25 or 26 seconds with whoever this guy is. Even the cut back to him with the camera, it creates a comic irony, and it generates positive emotion. So that's super important to find out where the dissonance is. If you don't, in a drama, if you don't create enough negative dissonance, you won't have positive payoff. And the depth of the dissonant negative is going to be parallel or at least correspond to how much positive you get. In comedy, it's a little bit different. You can have dissonance and it stays positive throughout, but you're looking for peaks because that dissonance causes you to get this tickle in your brain. Now, when we look at this ad, we see mom's new boyfriend is deep, and we're trying to show that this is a weird new family, and we counseled the client that there's just not enough of this going on in the middle of the ad. There's a lot of boredom from second 11 to second 22 until you see whoever this guy is. So we said not enough negative. Get some more characters like mom's new boyfriend. Show them doing some crazy things or shorten the ad. And when we look deeper, we found you remember that first slide I showed you, is it working as intended? Well, if you get to know the ad, it probably is okay for mom's new boyfriend to create some negative emotion because it's kind of intended. You kind of want people to go, what? Oh my gosh, that's crazy. Mom's new boyfriend. In this case, what we did is we cut the data, like we were showing you in rapid subtext, by people who thought the ad was funny and people who did not. So the people that had this negative reaction actually didn't even think the ad was funny. Why was that? We looked into it and found that mom's new boyfriend, when it was introduced the notion of divorce, mixed families, and some people didn't even know that mom and dad were divorced. So mom's new boyfriend was a bit of a very provocative kind of a statement. So there was a really unintended tension there. Now, some people will say any provocative engagement is engagement. It gets them to watch our ad. That's fine. So sometimes a judgment call has to be made as to whether to proceed or not with that ad. In this case, they did. They fixed up a few things here and there. But knowing where that tension is supposed to occur, knowing whether it's intended is important. And then in this example, which I won't go into detail, we find there really isn't any tension. And many of you, if you counsel clients on advertising, will find ads like this where everything is positive. It's soft and silky. We've got bunny rabbits and smiles and silky hair, and it's all very positive, but there is no tension. And so it stays right around the boring line there. And our counsel was, you've got this gal trying to sell bunnies. Have a bunny get away. Have her have so many bunnies she doesn't know what to, like something that creates some intrigue or some excitement or gets people to wonder what's going to happen next. And that's the major reason that you want some sort of tension or some dissonance in your ad, is because the whole goal here is every second you watch should make you want to watch the next second to find out what happens. And that's how story works. You create this puzzle. People can't wait to figure out how it resolves. In this case, in this ad, there was no puzzle, just a lot of good feelings.
I assure everyone, if they go back and watch Mint Mobile, you'll want to watch it again and again and again. So that's just a good example of dissonance setup.
Yeah. Okay. And then we just have a couple more pages here. So we'll end hopefully with at least 1 minute for questions. But two more tips. This is an interesting one. An ad with two guys after a hunk walks by that realize that their abs are really one ab. It's just one big gut. They're looking down at themselves, realizing their inadequacy. They put charcoal on themselves to look like they have abs, and it's a really funny scene. But what we see again and again in these is that reactions engage more than actions. So you see where the peak is that their friend's laughing response to them. It's a friendly laugh, and then she toasts them. And that's where we see people react. And this is why talk show hosts have sidekicks, why funny people have straight men, because it's the reaction that really helps us understand how we're supposed to react. You see this over and over again, that in an ad in which somebody is acting, somebody should be reacting. Show the face, show the laughter, show the reactions. That's where the engagement usually occurs. And then lastly, and most simply, find something more creative to end with than just the end card, because we've seen this. I didn't point it out in the other ads. We had some other examples where when viewers can sense that the engaging content is over, when the entertainment value is over, and you're shifting gears to tell me to buy something or put the brought to you by sign on the screen, I check out. And that's the place where it's most important for people not to check out, because this is in many cases the money scene. So any way that you can display the brand mid-content or have the brand be part of the ad or be part of the story, but even if it is at the end, ensure that you're not signaling that the content is over, because the content is why people are watching. Remember the puzzle, how's it resolved? What happens next? I can't wait to see more funniness. But if all that's over and you say, now brought to you by, and you have this end card, people check out. And again, that's the money scene. So many times that's the only scene where people know to attribute the great story and the emotion they felt to the brand.